Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So, there's a lot of videos going around right now where they're talking about the death of woke. Basically saying that the Snow White movie is the final nail in the coffin of woke. And it seems to be the underlying assumption that woke culture has run its course. People are seeing in their entertainment things that they absolutely don't want to see, and it's being reflected back to them finally by the people who make these products. And while I don't disagree with some of that statement in the fact that we see entertainment producers putting a halt on a lot of the stuff which caused this craziness to begin with, I believe that many people who are looking at this situation right now are not looking at it clearly at all. They are looking at the wrong metrics completely in making their estimation. So their endpoint is correct, but their reasoning in order to get to that endpoint is so spurious that it's going to cause a lot of confusion as to what is going to proceed from this very spot where we are, where you see quote unquote progressive woke culture dying on the vine. And that's what I want to discuss today. I want to look at, from my own perspective and the perspective of this channel, why this is happening right here and now, and why, assuming that it is the repairing of our culture in a specific way through economic forces alone, is a dangerous way to look at the entire situation. But before we get there, I just want to remind everyone that there are links in the description for my graphic novels and comics. There is a link for The Valiant Heroes, where you can purchase right away my 2 published graphic novels, The Valiant Heroes and Thomas Valiant. There is the link for my fantasy graphic novel, Crom the Destroyer, which is still in production. I apologize for that. It is taking much longer than it should, but it is still in production. We are working on it. There is also a link for the sign-up page for Fade to Blue, the new books that we are working on right now, which is a combination of Indiana Jones and film noir. That sign-up page is at the top, and if you go there, you can watch the trailer for Fade to Blue, you can see some of the art for that book, and you can leave your email address if you want to be informed via email when the project goes live. Fade to Blue will be available digitally, by the way. So if you're looking for some good entertainment based upon the traditional idea of a hero and a merit-based system wherein we create our product, then click on some of those links in the description or the pinned comment and go on over and see if my graphic novels are for you. Oh, and you're looking at some of the spectacular art from those graphic novels in the background right now. But back to our topic. All right, so let's start here. Last year, I did a video called The Year That Woke Died, because I believe that 2024 was indeed the year that your quote-unquote progressive entertainment had its back broken. So I'm not at odds with people when they say, after looking around them and seeing what is going on today, that woke culture is indeed dying. I do agree with that sentiment, but the point is, why? And more importantly, how is it playing out in real time? That is what is important because, well, let's just extend an analogy. If we're in a culture war, we do not want to be in a position where the enemy falls back simply to outflank us. So here's the problem with the entire thing. Let's focus a little bit on the disaster that is the Snow White movie, and the idea that with such a turning point, the companies are going to focus, at the very least, begrudgingly, on entertainment that is going to be more mass culture centered. That is to say, away from your quote-unquote progressive, woke, DEI-based entertainment that is meant to push a message and nothing more than a message. Now, you can get away with thinking that right off the bat by looking at something like the Snow White movie, and then by invoking the idea that these large cultural products that are being put out are years in the making. Therefore, we're still going to get some of these products as a holdover. Many will get canceled, just like the fact that the live-action Rapunzel, which supposedly was supposed to feature a black Rapunzel, has now been, as it is rumored, canceled because of the disaster that is Snow White. You will see some course correction there, but it's going to be a slow process because of the fact that you have these products that are so large in scale. It has taken years for them to be developed. Therefore, they can't be abandoned. Therefore, you're going to see more of them come out. You're just going to see less and less of a focus on them. And you're going to even see, as you have, if you're following the entertainment news, a lot of these larger entertainment providers like Disney make statements that, yes, they're turning around on some of these ideas of creating a story based on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and focusing more on mass appeal. So yes, you can take all of those things, link them together in your mind, and assume there is a straight line wherein we are going around a turn with the production of entertainment and how it is going to turn back to a mass appeal. And then make a further assumption that it is the economic and only the economic pressure that has been put upon these companies by the people who consume their products that is making them do so begrudgingly, but do so anyways. But the problem with this thinking is that it necessitates taking the entire thing and projecting it into the future in order to have it clearly make sense. And that is not the most logical or rational way in order to analyze the situation. That is actually a very left-leaning way of looking at the situation, projected into the future, and let's see how it's going to look in the future, and then we'll move backwards from the future point. I say it is foolhardy to do that. Again, don't disagree with the sentiment, the original sentiment about the death of woke culture, but it is foolhardy to put your analysis on that kind of footing. And here's the thing that throws a monkey wrench in this entire way of thinking, this entire process of analyzing the situation. There's a story that came out just about 2 weeks ago now, wherein the Disney shareholders, Disney being really the big boy on the block right now for entertainment, owning things like Marvel, Pixar, Star Wars, etc., etc., there was a vote, not of the people who run the company, but the people who are shareholders of the company. And they were asked, basically, if they wish to keep on following what is known as the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equity Index. So basically, the structure of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And within that vote, the vote of the shareholders, only 1% of the shareholders voted to divest themselves of the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equity Index. 1%. And again, I must stress, this is not the people running Disney. This is the shareholders of Disney itself. Because even I fell into the trap of saying, well, the people who run Disney, they're starting to turn around because they're doing things which is making it impossible for the shareholders to actually get their money's worth from their shares, and they can be sued, therefore, by the shareholders for improper direction of the company, and so they're going to turn around. But here's the thing. The shareholders don't want them to turn around. The shareholders. Do they want them to make money for them? I'm sure they do. Do they want them to have more of a mass appeal so that they can make more money for them? I'm sure that they do. Do they back the idea of backing off of the message in order to make that money? Possibly. Are they okay with the director making statements that, well, basically, if we look at the past and statements that have been made by companies like Disney, they simply don't follow through on, or their language is so twisted in their mind and the way that they try to explain it that it means the opposite of what they're saying? Yeah, I'm sure they back the people who run the companies, say, go ahead and do that. But when the rubber hits the road, 99% of the shareholders want to continue with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, how much of these shareholders are actual dyed-in-the-wool, quote-unquote, progressives, or how many of them are simply about 5 years behind the rest of us and don't want to be called racist and therefore vote it this way? Well, 6 of one, half dozen of another, as far as I'm concerned. If you're that weak at this point in the game, wherein you're still afraid of being called an histerophobe of various kinds, you're just a plaything of the left. So where am I going with all of this? Well, I'll give you my analysis of what is going on based upon my own experience. And what is that experience? Well, I think this entire thing is now in the political sphere. And I do have a little bit of experience with political theory. My second undergraduate degree was in political theory. I then went on to a master's program in political theory, which is basically the analysis of ideas and where they originate from. So I'll give you my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth. The problem is that most people want to focus on the cultural and look at everything in a cultural way in order to explain the cultural trends and shifts that we see around us today. And I could see why people would want to do that. That is actually a very right-wing way of looking at the entire thing. I've explained this before in a video probably about 2 weeks ago. It's based upon the idea that politics is downstream from culture. That is a very traditional, I would say, right-wing way of looking at things. Why? Because if you look at the actual traditional definition of politics, politics is a subsection of philosophy known as moral philosophy. It's public morals, basically, the subsection of it. And that would naturally flow out of culture itself, because in order to have public morals, first you must have a united public, which can be joined together within a moral structure. And that united public is your culture. So the culture exists first, and then your politics flow from that culture. It's pretty simple in a logical breakdown kind of way. There's that, and then there's also the very simplistic way of looking at the entire thing, wherein a lot of people who are on, let's say, YouTube are saying to themselves, I'm trying to extract myself from the political to begin with because I don't want this entire thing to be political. I don't want culture to be political. Therefore, I'm just going to focus on the cultural. And while that may have some benefits when talking about certain subjects, it is much too narrow a view in order to see what is actually going on right now. Why? Well, because as I said in that video weeks ago, the left does not see politics as being downstream from culture. They believe that everything is political. See the statements of people like Anita Sarkeesian. They believe that everything can be reduced to power politics. Everything. And that certainly includes culture. So they basically believe that culture and politics are one. In their minds, there is no way to separate the two, and this is the mentality of the companies, the large companies, who have been bent, at the very least in the last 20 years, towards this political and ideological mindset. So the point being, once again, to extend the analogy, if you are fighting a culture war and you concentrate only on the cultural, while your opponent thinks that the cultural and the political are the same thing, you are handicapping yourself to the extreme, to the extent that you might miss the end run of your enemy trying to outflank you, which is what I think is going on right now. Or to put it in different terms, as I have said, a lot of people are thinking that this entire thing is purely economics, purely the fact that these companies are losing so much money that they have to turn around. No, that's not it. It is economics as driven by the political. Not economics as is driven by the cultural, economics as is driven by the political. Now, to reiterate, this is not the way it should work in a healthy culture, but we're not in a healthy culture. Assuming that we're going to make ourselves more healthy as a culture by a standpoint of we're already in a healthy place is not a good or rational way to look at the situation. So what's the point? Well, the point is that if my analysis is correct, and it is the economic that they are trying to tinker with in order to have more mass appeal, because it is reliant on the political, because the political in their minds is one and the same with culture, then we have to look at their movements as a product of what is going on politically, not what is going on purely economically or purely economic as a result of culture itself. So let's look at this in terms of the political instead. There is a political battle going on right now, and yes, the quote-unquote progressive side is losing severely, but again, we have to concentrate on that in order to ensure that this continues. Let's go back to our example of the 99% of the shareholders of Disney still wanting to back DEI. At the same time, there is political pressure on companies like Disney to rectify their situation because they're basically being told that, hey, this DEI stuff, it is discrimination. And if you don't turn around, the federal government is going to go after you for violating discrimination laws here, there. And they're even saying to companies directly like Disney, you have people in the Trump administration going to companies like Disney, making public statements that turn around now or we will come after you. So how do you reconcile those two things? How do you reconcile them being come after and understanding that they're going to go into this political and litigical warfare possibly, but at the same time want to keep DEI at the highest level? That is to say, at the level of the shareholder. Well, obviously, and I'm sure it's no shock to you, the way that they reconcile those two ideas is that they give lip service to what the federal government wants, to what the normal consumer wants, to what the American public wants. They give lip service to that, while at the same time continuing their diversity, equity, and inclusion, quote-unquote, progressive agenda. They simply put DEI and progressivism on a back burner, not that they've taken it off the stove. And that is one of the basic maneuvers of the left. It is simply to redefine things when they get into a spot, when they get into a corner that they can't get out of. They simply use their tendency to play with language because they don't think language is anything but political either. They redefine words, even the most simple words in the world, to redefine their agenda in a way that it is hidden again. When I think of such things, I always hear the idiotic statement of Bill Clinton when he was being impeached of, well, that depends on what the definition of is. So let's look at this in the bigger picture way of what is going on political right now and try to bring it back to the same point of where we are right now and looking at the death of woke. In this culture war that we are in, the major political warrior figure right now is Donald Trump. What he is trying to do is to take out in a massive way the legs of the political establishment on the left. How is he doing so? Well, he's doing so by trying to take out their economic support in many different ways. He is waging a war on the very support system that holds up leftist politics to begin with. Instead of fighting a political battle where it is right versus left, which has got us nowhere for the last 20 years, 50 years, you can count more than that. He understands that you're not going to get anywhere in such a battle. The left can absorb losses and readjust their strategy because of their ability to manipulate the political through its support, which comes from the cultural. Therefore, you must change the culture first. In order to change the culture first, you must take out the support legs of the leftist political cultural movement itself. And I know I'm going a little bit far afield here, but I quite honestly, looking down the road, I didn't think this was possible about 6 months ago, but looking at it now, I honestly think that what Donald Trump is trying to do right now is to drive us straight into a recession. Why? Because he sees the fact that there is a recession on the horizon. There was one here, but the Biden administration simply would not acknowledge it by, again, redefining the word so that it didn't mean what it previously meant, but there is one on the horizon. There is the slimmest chance that you're going to avoid it, and so he wants it to come as soon as possible. And so he's taking a sledgehammer to the leftist political establishment, cultural establishment as well, knowing full well that it is going to speed up the looming recession. Deep recession, most probably. Now, why would he do that? Well, I would say the probability is that he wants to do it now so that by 2 years from now, when the midterms come along, they've enacted enough policies to deal with the recession in order to make people still give them, at the very least, a slim majority so that Donald Trump doesn't become a lame duck president. That's the short term. Long term is also so that in 2028, you won't see a massive shift back towards the left and have everything that has been going on now and will be going on for the next 4 years simply wiped away by a sea change back to the left and a radical leftist politician. And how do you do that? Well, you do that by ensuring that by the time 4 years from now rolls around, there's enough dealing with economic instability in a positive way on the right that you can convince the American voter, yes, they were the ones who actually saved what is left of America. Because again, I think that's the point of this entire recession. It is either take the pain now so that we can save what is left of America, or let it come at its own pace where it will most probably destroy the very basis of what people see as the country and its economic freedom as sacrifice to a more globalist way of looking at things. Now, what am I basing this entire analysis on? Well, not on projecting everything into the future, but looking at the past, looking at history and seeing where this thing has played out before. This is an example I talked about a couple of times before on this channel. If you look at Romania in the late 1980s, early 1990s, as well as parts of Czechoslovakia, they could see the writing on the wall. They could see that there was going to be an inevitable collapse of the Soviet Union. And the anti-communist forces decided to deal with this in a very specific way. Besides all of their political actions, they also decided to build underground culture. Why? Because they knew that when the collapse of the USSR was eventually going to occur, it was going to take a very short amount of time for the entire thing to collapse because it's a house of cards built on nothing. And so they needed to have culture for their society in order to switch over to that alternative culture under the old regime to the dominant culture of a new and refreshed country or sometimes ethnicity. And it was in doing so that the culture, the underground culture, came up at that moment of collapse of the USSR, came up from the underground and became mainstream, which thus absorbed the shock of the entire system collapsing and allowed their countries, at the very least, a short span of time wherein they could start to build the political systems which should naturally be downstream from culture. And of course, how did the USSR come to its end? Well, it came to its end because, not strictly of politics, but economic disaster that was the result of certain political agendas put forth, mainly by America, in order to destabilize and then collapse the Soviet Union itself. It was a political strategy using economics. And this is what you see around you today, exactly with what is going on with Donald Trump. He's doing the exact same thing. He knows that to attack the left politically is not going to work. He knows that the cultural institutions that support the left and support leftist culture are simply not going away. They will simply hide themselves in the corner until the storm has passed. Therefore, he must use the political in order to take out the economic legs that is supporting the entire system. That is the only way there's going to be change to bring back a healthy structure wherein politics is downstream from culture. And at the same time, I, as an independent creator, would say that this is all possible because there is a healthy underground entertainment system of which I am a part of. And I would take that historical event of the collapse of the USSR and impose it even more on the current day situation in saying that when you see the collapse of the leftist entertainment and cultural system, it's going to be tied in not only to the political, but it is going to be something that occurs very, very quickly. There's not going to be humming and hawing like now, saying, maybe in the future, maybe we'll see this happening. Maybe it's occurring because this, that, the other thing. Maybe if we use this kind of analysis, it will turn out in our favor. No, it's going to come all of a sudden. And there will be no discussion. People will say, yeah, there's no denying it. Unless, of course, you're severely deranged in the leftist mentality. But to bring it back to my original point, you can't just focus on the culture. I'm sorry, you can't. As much as you would like to, as much as all these YouTubers out there would like to, and stop thinking about the political and stop discussing the political, that is simply a way for the left to outflank you. This is still a culture war, and the left, which is in control of the cultural institutions, still sees culture and politics as the same thing. Therefore, this also makes it a political war. If you discount the political, you are driving yourself into a position where you can be outflanked. And if that happens, doesn't matter what Donald Trump does, everything's just going to turn back around come 4 years from now. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And don't forget, there are links in the description for my currently published superhero graphic novels, my in-production fantasy graphic novel, and my upcoming film noir style graphic novel called Fade to Blue. So click on one of those links in the description or the pinned comment and go on over and see if my graphic novels are for you. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.